day to you, my dear students. Once again, I'm Shansavi Alcalita for the next topic in our Rizal class. It's talking about the agrarian disputes in the 19th century Philippines. Okay, so the agrarian disputes. So let's have to begin first with the learning objectives. At the end of this chapter, the student should be able to examine Rizal's life in the Philippines within the wider context of the developments in the 19th century. Number 2 is to explain how the Hacienda de Calamba issue serves as an exemplary illustration of agrarian conflicts in the late 19th century, and describe the interplay of several factors that contribute to the changing landscape of Philippine society and economy. For the vocabulary, when we say conquistador, it refers to the Spanish conqueror. Caballeria is a small tract of land, included a land grant. Canon is an annual rent paid by the inquilino. Cavan is a measure equal to 75 liters. Hacienda is a large estates that were used for raising livestock and agricultural production. Inquilino, a tenant who rented land from the friars and subleased the land to the sharecroppers. Principales refers to the ruling elite class. Sharecropper or kasama, an individual who rented land from an inquilino and worked the land. Next one is Sitio de Ganado Mayor, a large tract of land included in a land grant. Okay, so here's the brief history of the friar estates in the Philippines. The origin of the friar estates can be traced back to the land grants awarded to the early Spanish conquistadores who arrived in the Philippines during the late 16th and 17th centuries. Approximately 120 Spaniards were given grants that were often composed a large tract of land known as Sitio de Ganado Mayor, measuring 1,742 hectares, and smaller tracts of land known as Caballerias, measuring 42.5 hectares. Okay, so in time, the Spanish hacienderos failed to develop their lands for three reasons. First, the Spanish population in the Philippines was transient. It was a common practice for Spanish administrators to return to Spain after having served in the country. Second, the market for livestock products which haciendas offered remained relatively small until the latter part of the Spanish colonial period. The third one is the galleon trade that was based in Manila offered bigger economic rewards and attracted more Spaniards. Because the Spanish hacienderos lacked the interest and inclination to develop their lands, the religious orders soon took over the task. Okay, so the land was acquired by the religious orders through various means. Often the lands were donated by Spaniards seeking spiritual benefits. There were cases too in which estates that had been heavily mortgaged to the ecclesiastics were eventually purchased by the religious orders themselves. Records reveal that a number of Filipino principales also contributed to the formation of the friar estates through donations and sales. Despite these methods, there persisted a commonly held belief among the Filipinos that the religious orders had no titles to their lands, and that they had acquired these lands through usurpation or other dubious means. Nevertheless, the religious estates in the Tagalog region continued to grow that by the 19th century. They constituted approximately 40% of the provinces of Bulacan, Tondo, presently Rizal, Cavite, and Laguna. So the preoccupation of the estates was varied during the early centuries of the Spanish colonial rule. The 16th and 17th centuries, the estates primarily served as cattle ranches as well as farms of subsistence crops. Rice and sugar later served as the main commodities produced in the haciendas and became important sources of income for the religious orders, especially during the 19th century. Agrarian relations in the haciendas developed in the time. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the social structure found in the haciendas was primarily composed of a lay brother administrators at the top of cultivating tenants below. Although the lay brother administrators were under the direct authority of the heads of their religious orders, they were relatively free to make their own decisions on administrative affairs. The tenants, on the other hand, were expected to work on the land and pay an annual rent, which was usually on a fixed amount of harvest and in later centuries money. So let's go over now to the Hacienda de Calamba conflict. Not much is known about the Hacienda de Calamba prior to 1759 other than it was owned by the several Spanish laymen. In 1759, a destitute Spanish layman in the name of Don Manuel Jauregui donated the lands to the Jesuits on the condition that he would be allowed to live in a Jesuit monastery for the rest of his life. The Jesuits would claim ownership to the land for a mere 8 years before they were expelled from the Philippines through a decree issued by King Charles III on February 27, 1767. As a result of the expulsion, Hacienda de Calamba, along with the other Jesuit properties, were confiscated by the government and put under the management of the Office of Jesuit Temporalities. In 1803, the government sold the property to a Spanish layman, Don Clemente de Asanza, for 44,507 pesos. When he died in 1833, the Hacienda de Calamba, which measured 16,424 hectares, was purchased by the Dominicans for 52,000 pesos. By this time, many families from neighboring towns had migrated to the hacienda in search of economic opportunities. Among the families that arrived at the hacienda were Rizal's ancestors, who eventually became one of the principal inquilinos in the hacienda. Although the lands in Calamba were leased to several families, it was Rizal's family that rented one of the largest leased lands, measuring approximately 380 hectares. Sugar was the main commodity planted in the hacienda, as there was a demand for the crop in the world market. Much of the wealth of Rizal's family came from these lands. Hence, it is but natural that when the conflict began to manifest itself as early as 1883, there was much for the family to be concerned about. In the year 1883, Paciano wrote that the friars were collecting rents without issuing the usual receipts. 2 years later, the tenants failed to pay their rents because the rent had supposedly increased while the sugar prices had remained low. To punish the tenants for not paying the rent, the Dominicans declared the lands vacant and invited residents of other towns to take over the tenancies. Because only few outsiders responded to the Dominicans' invitation, the friars weakened their position. Most tenants, except for 4 or 5, were spared from eviction. The charges against the friars continued with Rizal's brother-in-law Mariano Herbosa, specifically complaining about the yearly increase in rentals, faulty irrigation systems, and failure to issue receipts. Coupled with these problems was the fact that at this time, the price of sugar continued to decline in the world market. The situation became so dire that Pasiano at one point considered giving back his lands to the friars and clearing land elsewhere. So problems continued to escalate when in 1887, the colonial government demanded from the tenants of the hacienda a report on the income and production of the estate because they suspected that the Dominicans were evading payment of their taxes. The tenants complied and submitted the report, but they also attached a petition authored by Jose Rizal. The petition presented a list of grievances against the hacienda owners, including a complaint on the increasing amount of rent. To show resistance, some of the tenants began to withhold rents. So the petition of Jose Rizal can be found in the succeeding slides. So, as a form of retaliation, the friars began to evict tenants who refused to pay rent in 1891. Those who persisted still in resisting, the friars were eventually expelled. Among those who were exiled to remote areas in the country were Rizal's parents, brother, and sisters. Although Rizal had worked on reversing the decision of the Philippine courts, his family's exile would only be lifted upon the issuance of the decree from another governor-general. The experience affected Rizal deeply, and increasing despair he felt from the event that would be reflected on his second novel, El Filibusterismo. So here, I want you to read the following excerpt from the petition of the town of Calamba written by Jose Rizal in January 1888. And kindly follow instructions for the midterm assignment 2. So this will be our second assignment for the midterm. So please read this by yourself. Okay, move to the next slide. Okay, so the third one. So that's all. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Sean Sabi Alcalita. God bless you and goodbye.